This is my Harlem Renaissance project. Sixth period, Alec Brown. These are my famous artists. Number one, Medavox work Fuller. She was a multi-talented artist, wrote poetry, painted, and sculpted. Her art was based on celebrating Afrocentric themes. One of the first African American female sculptors. Her sculptures represented life, nature, and religion, and she represented a pridefulness in African American heritage and identity. And these are two of her most famous sculptures that are preserved, and they just kind of represented the hardships of African American life during her time period. Number two, Zora Neale Hurston. She was a fixture of New York City's Harlem Renaissance. She was an author, writer, and anthropologist. Her literature portrayed racial struggles in the early 20th century. Her works inspired many to seek justice and recognition, and her folktales brought resurrection to her community. And these are two of her pieces of literature. On the left side, those are the complete stories, and on the right side, critical perspectives, past and present. Both of these are series that she wrote that just kind of go over and deeply talk about the hardships of African American life, including slavery. Number three, Jean Toomer. Jean Toomer wrote profound and influential poetry and literature. He wrote poems and short stories about African American culture. His most notable work was Cain, a 1923 novel about African American life. His poems and literature are regarded as Harlem Renaissance classics, and he was a descendant of both white and black heritage. And these are one of his poems and a piece of his literature. That's Cain on the left, and then there's just a poem there. Number four, Jessie Fawcett. She was an African American editor, poet, essayist, novelist, and educator. Her work shaped African American literature in the early 1920s. Her goal was to show the true hardships of African American life and history. Her work fostered many others, including Countee Cullen and Jean Toomer, and she inspired to portray African American life as realistically and positively as possible. These are two of her poems here. Last but not least, Claude McKay. He was a Jamaican writer and poet, also a seminal figure in the Harlem Renaissance. His poems challenged white authority while celebrating his Jamaican culture. He wrote about tribulations that occurred as a black man in Jamaica and North America, primarily in the South, but also in the Northeast. His poems brought light to racist treatment by white men. His works inspired many great poets, including Jessie Fawcett and W.E.B. Du Bois. He was inspired by the clash between whites and blacks. And these are two. This is a poem here, and then on the left, a piece of literature, Home to Harlem, and then a poem named Enslaved. And that's it.